Well, depending on what time you're watching this, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I want to apologize again for the technical difficulties that we had this past Sunday. I know that there's a good amount of you that watch exclusively online, so I want to make sure that we have the service still available for you. So just recording just the sermon for you, and so that way you can still see it, you can still interact with it. So today we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapters 8 and 16. Now, my junior year at Olivet, I lived in the Grand Apartments, which are right behind the chapel. If you don't know the layout at Olivet, it's like being off campus and on campus at the same time. You literally walk maybe 20 feet from the building and you're on campus. So it's the plus of being on campus and being off campus at the same time. One Sunday in the spring, it was getting pretty warm out, and someone had the bright idea of having a slip and slide out in the front lawn. Couple issues with that. We did not have a slip and slide, nor do we have a spigot. So we went with the next best thing. We went to Menards, grabbed a few supplies, grabbed a couple tarps, threw those out front, and then got some tent stakes as well. So staked the tarps down, and then we slathered those tarps with dish soap, which we had a lot of fun for about 5 minutes. I think we all thought we'd be out there for hours, and we were out there for maybe 30 or 45 minutes. After a couple times going down that slip and slide, it just wasn't worth it anymore. We were all in a great deal of pain. I don't think my eyes have ever gone through what they went through that day. It was a fun idea, and I stand by the idea. It was a great idea. I do not stand by the execution of that idea. It was one of the worst decisions we made that semester. You know, there's definitely times where we make poor decisions. 1 Samuel chapter 8, we're going to start reading at verse 1. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. But his sons did not follow his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You are old," which is such a good way to start off a conversation. "You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." But when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord. And the Lord told him, "Listen to all the people are saying to you." See, it's not you that they have rejected. They have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly, and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights. You see, Israel wanted a king so they could be like every other nation. At this point, they didn't have a king. They had leaders called judges, and these judges, when one left, you didn't have another judge that started. You had years and years in between the judges. Because really what happened, Israel was supposed to be led by God. But when Israel turned away from God, he would call up these judges to lead the people, to bring the people back to God, to kind of turn things around. Now the people didn't like this setup. It seemed better to them if they had a stable leader with a stable contingency plan. So the leader dies, you know who's going to be in charge. Really what it came down to, they didn't want God to rule the nation. They wanted to be led by a man just like every other nation around them. To the Israelites, this seemed like the logical way for their nation to be governed. So God allowed them to have a king. God called Samuel to anoint Saul as their king. Now Saul looked the part. He was tall, he was good looking. The people looked at Saul and said, "Yes, this is the guy who's worthy of being our king. But there is also a problem, a big problem. Saul really didn't follow God's leading. He started to do things his own way. The power began to get to Saul's head. Things weren't working out. So God decided it's time for a change. God gave them the king the people wanted. But now it was time for God to give them the king that he wanted. 1 Samuel chapter 16, we're going to start reading at verse 1. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I've rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king." But Samuel said, "How can I go? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me." The Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, 'I have come to sacrifice to the Lord.' Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one that I indicate." Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, "Do you come in peace?" Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Don't consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him." The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Jesse then had Shammah pass by. But Samuel said, "Nor has the Lord chosen this one." Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. But Samuel said to him, "The Lord has not chosen these." So he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "Well, they're still the youngest," Jesse answered. "But he's out tending the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Even Samuel, the judge of the people, the one that you could say was the closest to God, even Samuel wasn't seeing things the way that God was. Samuel took one look at Eliab and immediately thought, "This must be the guy." Samuel was just looking at his appearance, but God didn't care about his appearance. God cared about his heart. Samuel thought that he knew what was best when considering a king, but in reality, Samuel was just looking at the same credentials that the rest of Israel looked at when they saw Saul. But God knew what Israel needed most was a man who would listen to what God had to say. Israel needs someone with a godly heart and a godly mind. Now, to be honest, we're not good at making decisions. We think we know everything there is to know about the things that come our way. But we barely know what's going on. With every decision that we have to make, our default way of looking at it is by leaning on our own understanding. The problem is, we just see a sliver of what's going on. But God always sees the whole picture. He sees and knows everything that is happening around us. We may think that we're making the logical decision, but let's be honest, most of the time, we don't know what the logical thing to do is. See, Samuel was thinking logically. Israel should have a king who looked the part. Someone who could strike fear in the hearts of their enemies. The king should be tall, strong, and good looking. The best of the best that Israel has to offer. But Samuel didn't see the big picture. The best thing for Israel was someone who would let God rule the nation, not someone who wanted to selfishly rule. When it comes to making a decision, let's not leave it all up to us. Let's bring God into the mix. How often do you pray about decisions? How often do you pray about big decisions? How often do you pray about small decisions? See, when we bring God into our decision-making process and lean on his understanding rather than our own, you're going to see the difference in what's going on in your life. We should never be dependent upon ourselves. We need to be fully dependent upon God. See, if you are truly seeking him, he will give you direction. He'll show you where to go. And it's at that time that you need to follow Samuel's example. Samuel could have anointed anyone that he wanted. He had that power. He had that authority. He could have anointed anyone. He didn't have to follow God's plan. He could have seen Eliab and said, all right, Lord, you've made a mistake. Obviously, this is the right guy for the job, so I'm just going to anoint the one that I think is best because you obviously don't know what's going on here. That's not what Samuel did. David didn't look the part. Even his father didn't see him as being worthy of king. If he did, he would have been there with the other 7 of his brothers. Instead, he was out tending the flock. He was the forgotten son. Jesse didn't look at him and say, yeah, David can be king. He was just little David. Samuel felt God's leading. I imagine for Samuel, it didn't make that much sense to him. But he still went in God's direction. Even if it didn't make sense, he still went in God's direction. And we have to be willing to do the same. Now, this past Friday, we were watching The Chosen. We watched episode 2 of the 4th season. And we had a really good time. And Bruce said something in the discussion that we had that really stuck with me and goes perfectly with what we're talking today. Bruce mentioned that when God calls us to go somewhere, or when he calls us to do something, we better put our shoes on and go. When God tells you the decision that you should make, don't hesitate, even when it's easy to do so. Be willing to go in that direction and then walk in that direction. Do whatever God is calling you to do. Thank you so much for taking time to watch this sermon, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, fantastic week. God bless you. See you Sunday.